Hello everyone and God bless you. Welcome to the amazing Bible story of Moses. This video will not only grow your Bible knowledge and faith, but prepare you for a peaceful sleep with our gentle storytelling and background rain sounds. Before we begin, I would love it if you could leave a comment below to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also remember to like the video and subscribe if you want to hear more like this. Okay, let's get comfy, relaxed, and let's begin. In a distant time, when the morning sun rose over the land of Egypt, the wide Nile River shimmered beneath its golden light. Lined with lush reeds and tall grasses, the river's banks stretched out like a green ribbon through the desert sands, a lifeline winding through an ancient world. The breeze rustled softly through the reeds, as if whispering secrets held for thousands of years. It was a place of both beauty and mystery, a place that gave life but also held hidden dangers. Birds swooped low over the water, fish rippled beneath the surface, and all around, the hum of life filled the air. In this peaceful scene, the Israelites, a humble, hard-working people, lived as slaves under the rule of the Egyptian Pharaoh. They toiled each day, laboring under the scorching sun, bending under the weight of tasks that seemed endless. Yet, despite their suffering, they carried within them the quiet strength of hope. They held to the belief that they were God's chosen people, that one day freedom would come. But for now, their days were filled with toil, and even their children were threatened by Pharaoh's harsh decrees. Pharaoh, fearing that the Israelites might grow too strong and rise against him, ordered that every newborn Israelite boy be cast into the Nile River. The people trembled under this decree, fearing for the lives of their precious children, yet powerless to stop it. The waters of the Nile, once a source of life, now held the shadow of danger and sorrow. Families whispered in fear, mothers held their infants close, and fathers searched for any way to protect their sons. In the midst of this dark time, there was a mother named Jochebed, a woman of courage and deep faith. She had recently given birth to a son, a beautiful, healthy boy with eyes that sparkled like stars. She saw something special in him, a light that gave her strength. As she held him close, her heart filled with a fierce love and a resolve that no danger could shake. She knew she had to protect him, even if it meant risking everything. For 3 months, she kept her son hidden, wrapping him in blankets and keeping him close, so no one would hear his soft cries. Each day, she prayed for strength, asking God for guidance and courage. Yet, as he grew, it became harder to hide him, and Jochebed knew that she had to make a difficult choice. She gathered reeds from the river's edge, weaving them together to create a small basket. She coated it with tar and pitch, making it watertight so it would float like a tiny boat. This basket would be her son's cradle, his lifeline. One morning, as the first light touched the Nile, Jochebed placed her precious child in the basket. Her hands trembled as she set him among the reeds, near the river's edge. She leaned close, whispering a blessing, her voice soft yet filled with love. "God be with you, my son," she murmured, her tears falling like dew upon his face. She prayed that he would be safe, that he would grow strong, and that, somehow, God would protect him. Jochebed's daughter, Miriam, watched nearby, hidden among the tall grasses. She was young, but her heart was full of love and loyalty for her baby brother. Her eyes never left the basket as it drifted gently, rocked by the water's soft current. Miriam was ready to follow, to watch over him, hoping with all her heart that he would be safe. As the morning sun rose higher, the river shimmered in its light. Pharaoh's daughter, a young woman of noble grace, came to the river to bathe. Surrounded by her attendants, she stepped into the cool waters, enjoying the calm and beauty of the early day. Her eyes drifted to the reeds, where the basket lay nestled among the grasses. Curiosity flickered within her, and she gestured to one of her attendants to fetch the basket. When the basket was brought to her, Pharaoh's daughter leaned down and gently lifted the cover. There, lying within the cradle of reeds, was a tiny baby, his eyes wide with wonder, his soft cries filling the air. Her heart softened as she looked upon him, her compassion stirred. She knew he was a Hebrew child, yet she felt a deep desire to protect him. In that moment, She made a choice that would change not only her life but the lives of countless others. She held him close, soothing his cries, and with a heart full of tenderness, she decided to raise him as her own. "This child shall be called Moses," she said softly, "for I drew him out of the water." With that name, Moses, his story began. A story that would carry him from the safety of Pharaoh's palace to the deserts of Midian, and, one day, to the liberation of his people. Watching from the shadows, Miriam's heart filled with relief. Summoning her courage, she approached Pharaoh's daughter, bowing respectfully. "Shall I fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Pharaoh's daughter nodded, and Miriam ran to fetch her mother. Jochebed returned, her heart overflowing with gratitude and awe. She took her child in her arms once more, knowing that God's hand had protected him. And so Moses grew up under Pharaoh's roof, nurtured by his own mother, yet surrounded by the riches of the Egyptian court. He would come to know the ways of the palace, yet within his heart, a seed of destiny was quietly growing. He was an Israelite, set apart for a purpose not yet revealed, held safely by the hands of both his earthly and heavenly mothers. As he grew, he would carry with him the love, courage, and faith of the woman who set him upon the waters, trusting in God's protection. With his mother's faith as his foundation and Pharaoh's daughter's compassion as his guide, Moses' journey was only beginning. The quiet reeds along the Nile, the gentle current that carried him, and the tender hands that held him, all were a part of the divine plan that would one day lead him back to his people. And so, the child in the basket drifted into his destiny, guided by a hand unseen but ever present, setting the stage for the incredible journey that lay ahead. Chapter 2: Growing Up in Pharaoh's Court. Moses grew up within the towering walls of Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by grandeur and luxury. As a young boy, he roamed the spacious halls adorned with golden carvings, murals, and statues of the gods of Egypt. Pillars stretched up to the ceiling, seeming to touch the heavens, while intricate mosaics glistened under the light filtering in through high windows. Every corner of the palace exuded an air of majesty, designed to impress upon all who entered the unmatched power of Pharaoh's reign. In every room, rich tapestries hung alongside ornate vases and treasures from distant lands, a testament to Egypt's strength and reach. Here, Moses was clothed in fine linens, attended to by servants, and educated alongside Pharaoh's own kin. As he grew older, Moses was taught to read and write, learning the language of the Egyptians along with the wisdom of their scholars. He studied mathematics, astronomy, and the mysteries of the Nile cycles. His tutors spoke to him of the stars and the seasons, of the gods and the eternal life they believed awaited those who honored them. They taught him to revere Pharaoh as a living god, an idea that cast an aura of both awe and fear over the palace. Yet, despite the elegance surrounding him and the impressive knowledge he absorbed, Moses felt a quiet unease in his heart, a feeling he could not quite understand. There was a part of him that didn't quite fit, a small, persistent tug on his soul. When he looked out from the palace over the lands of Egypt, he would often see the Israelites laboring in the distance, their forms bent low under the scorching sun as they worked on Pharaoh's vast construction projects. Their cries echoed faintly in the distance, the weight of their suffering reaching him even from afar. Though he was raised as a prince, something in Moses' spirit seemed to stir at the sight of his people. He could not yet grasp why, but he felt a deep sympathy for their plight. He would catch himself watching them, longing to understand who they were and why they toiled so relentlessly. Even in his youth, Moses found himself drawn to quiet places where he could think, far from the bustling activity of the palace. He would walk along the cool marble corridors in the early morning or late at night, when the palace was silent and shadows stretched long across the floors. In these peaceful hours, he often felt the faintest whisper in his heart, a voice that seemed to beckon him towards a purpose yet unknown. He didn't speak of this to anyone, for he barely understood it himself. But as the years passed, that quiet voice grew stronger, a gentle nudge that reminded him he was not truly of this world of riches and power. Though he was a prince, Moses never quite embraced the title. He wore the garments of royalty and sat at the feasts with Pharaoh's family, but he often found himself more comfortable in the quieter company of his own thoughts. The noise of the court, the laughter of Pharaoh's sons, and the endless banquets seemed to blur together in his mind. Even when he laughed and joined the games of the royal court, he felt an underlying stillness within him, as if he was waiting for something, though he knew not what. As a young man, he came to know both compassion and inner strength. He was loved by the Egyptians around him, yet he held a quiet sense of humility that set him apart. Pharaoh's daughter, who had raised him as her own, often marveled at Moses' calm, reflective nature. She noticed how he preferred listening to speaking, and how his eyes would grow distant when he looked upon the Israelites from afar. Yet, despite her curiosity, she kept these observations to herself, sensing that Moses' journey was one she could not entirely share. One day, while he was still young, Moses wandered beyond the palace walls, accompanied by a small guard. As they moved through the bustling streets of Egypt, Moses' eyes took in the sights around him with awe and curiosity. He saw merchants selling their wares, children playing, and craftsmen at work. The hum of life in Egypt was vibrant, filled with the smell of spices, the sound of laughter, and the chatter of people in the marketplace. But amid this lively scene, he also caught glimpses of sorrow and hardship, especially among the Israelite slaves. Men and women, their faces lined with weariness, carried heavy burdens, their brows slick with sweat as they labored in silence. At one point, Moses noticed a group of Israelites working under the fierce gaze of an Egyptian overseer. The man barked orders, his voice harsh and unyielding, as he struck the slaves with a whip, urging them to work faster. Moses felt a pang in his heart, a deep sadness mingled with a sense of anger at the injustice he witnessed. Though he was dressed as an Egyptian, a prince of Pharaoh's court, he felt a kinship with those laboring under the midday sun. In that moment, he began to understand that the suffering of his people was not something he could ignore. Returning to the palace that evening, Moses found himself deeply moved by what he had seen. He sat in the quiet of his chamber, staring out over the darkening landscape. The stars began to appear one by one, and as he gazed at them, he felt once more the faint pull of that inner voice. Though he couldn't fully grasp its meaning, he sensed that his life was meant for something beyond the golden halls and marble floors of Pharaoh's palace. His spirit was restless, and he felt as if he stood on the edge of a great journey, one he could not yet see, but which awaited him nonetheless. Each passing day seemed to add to the quiet burden in his heart, and he began to grow more and more detached from the palace life. Pharaoh's court, with all its riches and splendor, felt more foreign to him than ever. The servants, the feasts, the sounds of laughter, all seemed distant, as if he were watching from another world. Moses spent more time walking along the edges of the palace gardens, seeking solitude and silence, his heart full of questions. In these quiet moments, he would reflect on his place in the world, sensing that he was both a part of Egypt and yet entirely apart from it. He was drawn to the river, where he often sat by the reeds, remembering the stories he'd been told of how he was found. He was both prince and wanderer, a young man searching for his purpose, feeling the pull of his heritage like a distant call. It was as if the land itself whispered to him, the earth and sky urging him to remember who he was, even as he struggled to understand his own heart. The young Moses did not yet know the incredible path that lay ahead, nor the trials he would face. But in his heart, he carried the seeds of a deep faith, a faith that would grow with time and experience. He would rise not as a prince of Egypt, but as a servant of his people, chosen for a purpose he could only begin to imagine. And so, Moses continued his days in Pharaoh's court, living as both a prince and a stranger, a young man waiting, listening, and slowly discovering the destiny that lay hidden within his soul. Chapter 3. A Call to Justice. Moses flees Egypt. As Moses matured, his inner restlessness grew, and the quiet but relentless pull toward the plight of his people deepened. The sun blazed down one hot afternoon as he walked beyond the palace walls, his heart heavy yet drawn toward the bustling life of Egypt's streets and fields. Despite being a prince, he felt far more a stranger than ever before, unable to find peace amidst the luxury of the palace or the reverence shown to him by Pharaoh's court. Something within him stirred each time he saw the Israelites laboring under Egypt's oppressive rule, feeling an invisible but unbreakable bond with them. On this particular day, Moses wandered further from the royal grounds, finding himself amid the workers who were bending under the weight of heavy stones and building blocks, each one drenched in sweat, their bodies bruised and weary. His heart clenched as he watched their strained faces and felt the harshness of their reality. Just as he looked away, a shout broke through the air, filled with anger and the snap of a whip. Moses turned quickly, his eyes widening at the scene unfolding before him. An Egyptian overseer was striking an Israelite man, the whip lashing against the man's back with cruel precision, each blow more merciless than the last. The Israelite crumpled beneath the assault, his body bowed with exhaustion, his hands trembling as he tried to steady himself. Moses felt a rush of anger and sorrow so intense it seemed to course through his veins like fire. He had grown up learning the ways of Egyptian justice, of power and command, yet this felt profoundly wrong to him. Here was a man, one of his own people, suffering, humiliated, and beaten without mercy. This was not justice, he thought, but cruelty. Before he could stop himself, Moses stepped forward, his feet moving with a purpose he hadn't known until now. His voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Stop!" The overseer paused, surprised by the authority in Moses' tone. For a moment, everything fell silent. But in that silence, a surge of rage filled Moses, a sense of responsibility and indignation he had never felt so clearly. As the overseer turned to strike again, Moses seized the man, his hand raised to stop him. A struggle ensued, swift and forceful. And in the heat of that moment, the overseer fell silent, his body still, life slipping away. The realization hit Moses all at once. He looked down at his hands, trembling in the aftermath of his actions, stunned by the turn of events. He hadn't meant for this to happen, yet he could not escape what had just occurred. The Israelites nearby watched in stunned silence, their faces a mix of awe and fear, while whispers rippled through the crowd. Moses looked into their eyes, seeing in them a mix of hope and horror, as if he had done what they dared not imagine. But he also saw fear, the kind that reminded him of the cost of opposing Pharaoh's power. It dawned on him then that he could not stay in Egypt. That night, Moses lay awake in his chamber, his thoughts a torrent of worry, guilt, and uncertainty. He had defended his people, yes, but he had also crossed a line, a boundary that meant he could no longer stay in the land of Egypt without consequence. He knew that by morning, word would reach Pharaoh, and the consequences would be severe. Moses' heart pounded as he wrestled with the weight of his actions and the choice that lay before him. With the first light of dawn, Moses made his decision. He gathered what little he could, leaving behind the silks and jewels that marked his royal status. There was no room for hesitation. He slipped through the palace grounds under the dim morning sky, passing silently among the shadows until he reached the edge of the city. Each step felt heavy with finality, a farewell to the life he had known, to the family that had raised him, and to the luxury he had once taken for granted. But he did not look back. The desert stretched before him, vast and daunting, yet somehow it felt like a welcome freedom after the confinement of the palace. As he ventured into the wilderness, he felt the weight of his past slip away, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Where would he go? What would he do? Yet he could not ignore the whisper in his heart, the call to something beyond Egypt, a call to justice, to truth, and to a life that would one day lead him back to his people. Days turned into nights, and nights back into days, as he journeyed through the barren landscape. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and the cold settled in with the stars at night. But Moses pressed on, driven by a purpose he couldn't fully understand. He walked through valleys and climbed rocky hills, his mind replaying the scenes he had left behind. The suffering of his people, the cruelty of their overseers, and his own anger, which had spurred him to act without a second thought. At last, weary and sunburned, he reached the land of Midian, a place far removed from Egypt, where the desert sands stretched on under the wide, open sky. It was there, by a quiet well shaded by palms, that Moses' life would take yet another turn. As he rested, his tired eyes closed for a moment. He heard the voices of shepherds approaching the well with their flocks, their laughter filling the quiet air. He watched as a group of sisters arrived, leading their own small flock, their hands steady and their voices gentle as they tended to their sheep. But the peace was soon shattered as the shepherds pushed the sisters aside, driving their flock away to water their own sheep. Moses, still weary from his journey, felt a familiar stir of injustice in his heart. Without hesitation, he rose and intervened, defending the sisters and helping them draw water for their flock. The sisters, grateful for his kindness, thanked him and invited him to their home. There, he met their father, a wise and welcoming man named Jethro, who took Moses in with open arms. In the land of Midian, Moses found a place of refuge and a chance to start anew. Here, he lived simply, working as a shepherd, finding comfort in the quiet, humble life he now led. He spent his days caring for the flocks, wandering the hills and valleys, and learning the ways of the land. Gone were the lavish garments and the trappings of royalty. Now he wore simple robes, his hands rough from labor, and his heart calm in the solitude of the wilderness. Though far from Egypt, his memories of the past remained with him, like distant echoes that softened over time. Yet he knew that his life had changed irrevocably, that his actions in Egypt had set him on a path from which he could not turn back. In the quiet of the desert nights, under the vast expanse of starlit skies, he reflected on his journey, wondering about the future and the purpose that lay ahead. As Moses tended the sheep, day by day, season by season, he slowly grew in wisdom and patience. The prince of Egypt had become a shepherd in a foreign land, yet a part of him felt closer to home in this simple life than he ever had in Pharaoh's palace. In the wilderness, he found peace, the kind that calmed his restless spirit, the kind that allowed him to listen, to himself, to the land, and perhaps even to God. And though he did not know it yet, his time in Midian was only the beginning of a far greater journey, a journey that would one day lead him back to Egypt, back to his people, and back to the heart of his true purpose. The call to justice that had driven him from Egypt still burned quietly within him, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Chapter 4. A New Life in Midian. In the peaceful land of Midian, Moses found a quiet sanctuary, a life far removed from the relentless noise and burden of Egypt's splendor. Here, the landscape was painted with wide stretches of desert sands, hills that rose gently under the soft sunlight, and valleys filled with wild grasses that swayed in the gentle wind. The air was clean, carrying with it the scent of earth and open skies, filling his lungs with a simplicity he had never known before. As the days turned into weeks, Moses slowly settled into the rhythms of this new life, letting go of the palace's grandeur and embracing the peaceful routine of a shepherd's work. In Midian, Moses was no longer a prince but a humble man living by his own labor. He worked side by side with Jethro's family, especially Jethro's eldest daughter, Zipporah, whose kindness and gentle spirit soon drew Moses' heart. Zipporah was strong, both in body and spirit, with a love for the land and its creatures. She had a quiet wisdom that matched the calm of the desert, and her laughter was as warm as the Midian sun. Together, they tended to the flock, guiding the sheep through the rocky hillsides, searching for patches of green amid the arid landscape. The work was hard, but it was honest. Every morning, Moses rose with the first light, leading the flock into the hills as the sun cast a warm glow across the land. He watched the sheep carefully, guiding them through the rough terrain, and his heart grew full with each passing day, a steady, grounded peace that he had never known before. The grandeur of Egypt felt distant now, a faint memory overshadowed by the simplicity and beauty of life in Midian. Moses felt his spirit settle, as if he was finally finding his place, not as a prince, but as a shepherd, a caretaker of life in its simplest, most precious form. The days in Midian unfolded with a quiet joy. Moses learned the ways of the land, how to read the signs in the sky, how to find water in the driest seasons, and how to protect the flock from wild animals. Under the guidance of Jethro, he learned the ways of the shepherd, developing patience and attentiveness. Moses watched as Jethro led his family with humility and strength, his wisdom rooted in respect for the earth and its creatures. This new world of Midian taught Moses lessons that no royal education could ever provide: a deeper understanding of humility, gratitude, and reverence for the Creator's handiwork. As the seasons passed, Moses and Zipporah's companionship blossomed, and eventually, they married in a simple ceremony under the vast sky. It was a quiet, private moment, shared with close family and the endless desert as witness. Zipporah became his wife, his partner in life, and together they built a humble home in Midian. They were blessed with children, and Moses' heart swelled with gratitude each time he held his newborn child, marveling at the miracle of life. The years flowed like the gentle streams that occasionally graced the desert after rare rains. Moses became a devoted husband, a loving father, and a trusted shepherd. The simplicity of his life filled him with a sense of purpose and peace. Yet, even as he poured himself into this new life, a part of him held onto the memories of his people, the Israelites. Every so often, in the quiet of night or the stillness of early dawn, the image of his people's suffering would flicker in his mind, like a distant echo he could not ignore. Though he felt far from Egypt, the weight of his heritage, his identity, remained within him, silent but unforgotten. He could never completely shake the image of the Israelite slaves bent low under the sun, toiling under the harsh eyes of their overseers. He remembered their faces, the sorrow etched into their skin, and the burdens they carried. He remembered the cries of those who suffered, their voices mingling with the sounds of whips and harsh commands. These memories lay hidden in the depths of his heart, surfacing now and then to remind him of a world he had left behind. A world still bound in chains, yearning for freedom. One day, as Moses tended his flock, he found himself alone in the quiet wilderness, surrounded by hills and open skies. He gazed out over the landscape, his heart swelling with gratitude for the life he had found, yet tinged with a quiet sadness for his people. The silence of the desert seemed to listen, a comforting presence that understood his unspoken thoughts. He breathed deeply, feeling a peace that mingled with an old sorrow, and he found himself praying, a soft whisper to the unseen God who watched over all things. Moses knew that he was blessed, that he had found a life rich in love, family, and purpose. He had a wife who was his equal, children who filled his days with laughter, and work that gave him meaning. Yet his soul could not entirely rest, not while his people still suffered. The Israelites were still there, enduring hardship, and though he was miles away, his heart remained connected to them, as if a part of him had never truly left Egypt. As he grew older, Moses' bond with the land deepened, and he found solace in the vast, quiet beauty of the desert. He marveled at the sunrise each morning, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold, and he watched as the stars blanketed the heavens each night, filling him with awe for the Creator's power. He felt closer to God here in the wilderness than he ever had in the temples of Egypt, surrounded by statues and rituals. Here, in the silence and simplicity, he felt the presence of something far greater than himself, a force that seemed to breathe life into all things, that held the earth, the sky, and the souls of his people. Over time, Moses' strength grew both in body and spirit. The years of tending sheep, of living close to the land, had honed him, teaching him patience, endurance, and resilience. He had become a man of humility and quiet strength, a man shaped by the lessons of the earth and the love of a family. He no longer thought of himself as a prince but as a servant to life itself, a guardian of the land and its creatures. Yet the voice within him, that quiet call to justice, remained. He felt it stirring from time to time, a gentle reminder of a purpose yet unfulfilled. Moses could not know it then, but his years in Midian were a preparation, a time of growth and transformation. His journey was far from over, and the call within him was merely waiting, gathering strength for the day it would lead him back to Egypt, back to his people, and back to the heart of his destiny. In the quiet land of Midian, surrounded by family and the peace of the desert, Moses found contentment, a life filled with grace and purpose. But he also knew that life often held mysteries yet to be revealed, destinies that unfolded only in their own time. And so he waited, his heart open to the path ahead, trusting that the one who created the heavens and the earth would guide him when the time was right. Chapter 5. The Burning Bush, God's Calling. One day, as Moses was guiding his flock through the rugged terrain of the wilderness, he ventured further than usual. He climbed a rocky slope, leading his sheep toward the greener pastures hidden within the valley's folds. The day was clear, and the sky stretched endlessly above him, as if embracing the earth with silent promise. Moses felt a quiet contentment, absorbed in the steady rhythm of the journey, his heart attuned to the landscape's every whisper. As he neared a particular hill, something caught his eye, a flicker of light, soft and glowing, at the top of the mountain. Puzzled, he stopped and gazed upward, shielding his eyes from the sun. There, amidst the rocks and dust, he saw it. A bush alight with fire, its flames dancing brightly, yet the leaves and branches remained untouched, unburned. Moses blinked, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. But no matter how many times he looked, the bush burned, yet it was not consumed. A mixture of curiosity and wonder stirred within him, drawing him toward the mysterious sight. Leaving his flock safely gathered, he climbed the hill, the soles of his sandals pressing into the warm, uneven earth. His heart quickened as he approached the bush, the flames flickering, yet steady and pure. It was a sight both strange and beautiful, a fire that did not devour but seemed to shimmer with a holy purpose, a presence far greater than himself. As he stood before the burning bush, his breath caught, and he felt a presence envelop him. A feeling of peace yet awe, as though he were in the company of something beyond earthly understanding. Then, in the midst of this quiet wonder, a voice broke the silence, clear and resounding, filling the air around him. "Moses! Moses!" Moses' heart raced, yet he felt no fear, only reverence. The voice was gentle yet powerful, as if it resonated from deep within the earth itself. Trembling, he replied, "Here I am." The voice spoke again, each word carrying weight, drawing him closer. "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Without hesitation, Moses bent down and slipped off his sandals, his fingers brushing the warm earth beneath him. As he stood barefoot on the sacred ground, a sense of humility washed over him, grounding him in a way he had never experienced. "I am the God of your father," the voice continued, "the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." With these words, Moses felt a surge of recognition, a stirring in his soul that reached deep into his heritage, his very identity. He had grown up hearing tales of the God of his ancestors, the God who had made promises to Abraham, who had walked with Isaac and blessed Jacob. Yet here, in the quiet of the wilderness, the presence of this God felt overwhelmingly real, tangible, as if reaching across time and space to meet him here in this moment. Overcome with awe, Moses lowered his head, covering his face with his hands. He felt unworthy to gaze upon such holiness, to be in the presence of the Creator, the God who had shaped the stars, the mountains, and the hearts of men. Silence filled the air, a silence that was alive with reverence. As Moses waited, his heart open, his spirit humbled. Then, the voice spoke once more, this time with a message that would change the course of his life forever. "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." As the words filled his heart, Moses felt a surge of emotion, a mix of sorrow for the suffering of his people and an inexplicable joy at hearing that God had not forgotten them. God had heard their cries, seen their pain, and was now planning to deliver them from bondage. For so many years, the Israelites had lived in oppression, their cries unanswered. But now, in this moment, in the silence of the wilderness, God's compassion was revealed, and a promise was born. But then, the voice shifted, drawing Moses back into the present with words that left him breathless. "So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people the Israelites out of Egypt." The weight of those words struck him deeply. Go? To Egypt? To confront Pharaoh? The very thought made his mind whirl. He had left Egypt behind, had shed his past life like an old garment. He had found peace in Midian, built a family, and embraced the quiet life of a shepherd. And now, God was calling him to return to the place he had once fled, to face the ruler he had once served. "Who am I?" Moses stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "That I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Doubt crept into his heart, filling him with uncertainty. He was no longer a prince, just a simple shepherd, unworthy, unprepared. How could he, a man who had spent years wandering in the desert, be the one to lead an entire nation to freedom? But God's response was firm, filled with reassurance and strength. "I will be with you," the voice said, and those words wrapped around Moses like a mantle, calming his fears, grounding him in a purpose beyond himself. "And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Despite the promise, questions still filled Moses' mind, worries he could not ignore. "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I tell them?" In response, God revealed something profound, a name that held the power of eternity. "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." The name resonated in Moses' heart, a declaration of God's eternal presence, his unwavering existence, and his boundless power. "I am the one who was, who is, and who will always be." God's voice continued, filling Moses with the words he would need, promising that the Israelites would listen to him, that he would lead them to freedom, and that the Egyptians would release them, though it would not be without struggle. As the words sank into his soul, Moses felt a mixture of fear and hope, a stirring of purpose that he could not ignore. Yet, his doubts lingered, and he asked, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me?" God, with patience and understanding, showed Moses signs. A staff that turned into a serpent, a hand that became leprous and then was healed, to reassure him of the divine power that would accompany him on his mission. And still Moses hesitated. "But, Lord, I am slow of speech and tongue." He feared his own weaknesses. But God's response was gentle yet unyielding. "Who gave human beings their mouths? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." Though Moses' heart still wrestled with fear, the assurance of God's presence filled him with newfound strength. At last, he understood. He was not being called to rely on his own strength, but to lean entirely on God's. As Moses descended the mountain, the path of his life had shifted, and he knew that his journey with God had truly begun. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with trials he could scarcely imagine. But he walked with the promise that God would be with him, guiding each step, until the day he would lead his people to freedom. Chapter 6. Returning to Egypt and confronting Pharaoh. As Moses descended from the sacred mountain, the weight of his calling settled upon him like a cloak. The tranquil life he had built in Midian was now behind him, replaced by a mission that filled him with a mixture of courage and trepidation. His heart pounded with the knowledge that he would soon stand before Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, his former home, a place now filled with memories he had once tried to leave behind. And yet, in the depths of his soul, Moses knew he could not turn away. He had been given a purpose, a command from God himself, and he would carry it forward. Moses returned to his family, where he took time to explain what had happened on the mountain, the divine calling that had reached him from the burning bush, and the mission God had given him to set the Israelites free. He told Zipporah of his fears, his uncertainties, and the challenge he knew awaited him. Without hesitation, Zipporah agreed to accompany him, to journey with him into a future that was unknown but filled with purpose. So Moses gathered his family, his staff, now a symbol of the divine power that would guide him, and the few belongings they could carry. Together they set out for Egypt, Along the way, memories of his past life returned. The splendor and luxury of Pharaoh's palace, the golden corridors, the pillars adorned with hieroglyphs. This time, however, his journey was humble and quiet, with faith as his true guide. As he approached the land of Egypt, Moses' heart began to race, and he prayed silently, reminding himself that God was with him. When he arrived, he met his brother Aaron, whom God had sent to meet him. The two embraced, their reunion both joyous and solemn, for Aaron understood the mission that lay before them. Moses shared with Aaron all that God had spoken to him, recounting the signs God had shown him, and together they prepared to face the task at hand. Their first step was to speak to the elders of Israel, the leaders among the people. The elders watched in awe as Moses performed the signs as God had instructed, the staff transforming into a serpent, his hand becoming leprous and then restored. One by one, they bowed their heads, realizing that God had not forgotten them. He had heard their cries and was moving to deliver them from bondage. Strengthened by the support of the Israelite leaders, Moses and Aaron approached the palace, its grandeur towering before them, tall and formidable, a symbol of Pharaoh's power. The journey from the gates of Egypt to the palace felt like a lifetime, each step carrying the weight of their mission. When they entered, Pharaoh sat upon his throne, a figure of unyielding authority, surrounded by attendants and guards, his expression one of cool indifference. Pharaoh's gaze turned upon Moses and Aaron, and a faint trace of recognition flickered in his eyes as he looked upon the man who had once been raised among his people, now standing before him as an emissary of an unknown God. In that moment, Moses took a steady breath, feeling the strength of God's presence with him, and he spoke the words he had been commanded. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, Let my people go, so that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's laughter echoed through the hall, a sound laced with arrogance and disdain. He leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Moses, and replied with a tone both mocking and dismissive. "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses and Aaron exchanged a glance but stood firm, unshaken. They repeated God's message, urging Pharaoh to heed their words. Instead of showing mercy, he ordered the Israelite slaves to be burdened with even greater labor, demanding they gather their own straw for bricks while maintaining the same workload. The cries of the Israelites rose, their suffering intensified, and resentment grew against Moses and Aaron for stirring Pharaoh's wrath. Distraught, Moses returned to God in prayer, his heart heavy with sorrow for his people. He cried out, wondering why God had sent him if it only led to more suffering. But God's response was filled with patience and assurance. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh," God said, his voice a promise of what was to come. "Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go." Bolstered by God's reassurance, Moses continued his mission, even as the Israelites questioned and doubted him. The people's spirits were low, their hope tested by Pharaoh's oppression. Yet Moses held tightly to God's words, trusting that the deliverance promised was near. Chapter 7. The 10 Plagues and the Power of Faith. As the days turned into weeks, Moses and Aaron returned again and again to Pharaoh's court, each time delivering God's urgent message. "Let my people go." Each time, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and each refusal was met with yet another display of God's power, a divine response that shook the very foundations of Egypt. With each encounter, Moses felt the weight of his mission heavy upon him, yet he held fast to his faith, believing that God would ultimately prevail. The first of the plagues came swiftly, as God transformed the waters of the Nile into blood. The river, once a life-giving source for the people, turned foul, its waters thick and repugnant. Fish died, and the stench permeated the land, a sign of the judgment that had befallen Egypt. The Egyptians dug along the banks of the Nile in desperate search for clean water, but the foulness of the river served as a relentless reminder of Pharaoh's defiance. Yet, even in this chaos, Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding, and he refused to let the Israelites go. Then came the plague of frogs, swarming over the land, invading homes, beds, and kitchens, filling every corner with their relentless chorus. The The people of Egypt were horrified, and Pharaoh, in desperation, summoned Moses, pleading for relief. "Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away," he begged, his voice tinged with panic. Moses prayed, and the frogs disappeared. But as soon as the land was cleared, Pharaoh's heart hardened once more, and he reneged on his promise to let the Israelites go. With each new plague, God demonstrated his power, and each time, Pharaoh's obstinacy intensified. Next came the gnats, rising from the dust and swarming over man and beast, biting with their painful sting. The magicians of Pharaoh's court tried to replicate this miracle, but they could not. They finally recognized the hand of God at work and said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." Yet still, Pharaoh remained unmoved, unwilling to yield. Then the flies descended upon Egypt in a terrible wave, filling every home and land with a buzzing, biting frenzy. But in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, no flies appeared. This distinction was a powerful testament to God's protection over his chosen people. Even as the Egyptians suffered, Moses and Aaron witnessed the grace that God extended to his people, and their faith deepened. But Pharaoh, still resistant, continued to refuse their demands. As the plagues progressed, the next affliction was upon the livestock. A severe disease struck the animals of Egypt, killing off horses, donkeys, camels, and cattle, while those of the Israelites remained unharmed. The sight of dead animals piled high became another sign of the consequences of Pharaoh's refusal to obey God's command. Yet still, he remained hardened in heart. Moses and Aaron returned once more, standing before Pharaoh to declare the next plague: painful boils that would break out upon the Egyptians and their livestock. This time, the magicians were unable to stand before Moses because of the boils that covered them, a powerful sign of God's authority. Even this act of divine judgment did not soften Pharaoh's heart. He remained resolute in his pride and stubbornness. The eighth plague followed swiftly, locusts that swarmed across the land, devouring what little remained after the hail. The crops that had escaped the hail were now consumed, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. Pharaoh, once again, pleaded with Moses to pray for relief, promising to let the Israelites go. But as soon as the locusts were gone, his resolve returned, and he reneged once more. Then darkness fell over the land, a deep, oppressive darkness that enveloped Egypt for 3 days. It was so thick that the people could not see one another or move about. The only light was found among the Israelites. This plague served as a powerful reminder that God's light shines even in the darkest of times, providing hope and protection to his people. With each plague, the tension in Egypt grew. The people suffered, and the cries of the Israelites grew louder, yet Pharaoh remained steadfast in his refusal. God had shown his power in ways that were undeniable, but Pharaoh's pride blinded him. Finally, the 10th plague was foretold, the death of the firstborn. God instructed Moses to prepare his people for this final act of judgment and deliverance. Moses shared with the Israelites the instructions given to him by God. They were to take a lamb without blemish, slaughter it, and apply its blood to the doorposts of their homes. When the Lord saw the blood, he would pass over them, sparing them from the judgment that would come upon Egypt. This act of faith was a sacred moment, one that would forever mark the beginning of their deliverance and a new life. As the night of the 10th plague approached, the air was thick with anticipation and dread. The Israelites prepared their homes, gathering with family, and feasting on the lamb as they awaited the midnight hour. For the Egyptians, the night brought terror. As the clock struck midnight, a cry of anguish rose from every household in Egypt, for the firstborn of every family perished, men and beasts alike. Through the trials of the 10 plagues, Moses had witnessed firsthand the might of God, the strength of faith, and the unfolding of divine purpose. Each plague was a testament to God's unwavering commitment to his people, and a reminder that faith in him could conquer even the most hardened of hearts. As they prepared for their departure, Moses felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that the journey to freedom had begun, all under the watchful eye of the God who saves. Chapter 8: The Exodus and the Parting of the Red Sea. With the cries of anguish still echoing through Egypt, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night, his face a mask of despair and desperation. "Rise up," he commanded, his voice trembling with fear, "and go out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel. Go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." The urgency in Pharaoh's tone signaled the breaking point of his pride. He had finally acknowledged the might of the God of Israel. Moses and Aaron hurried to gather the Israelites, and soon the news spread like wildfire. "We are free! We are leaving Egypt!" Joyous shouts rang through the camp, mingled with disbelief and relief. Families embraced, tears of happiness streamed down their faces, and excitement thrummed in the air as they prepared for their journey into the unknown. The Israelites packed their belongings, gathering unleavened bread in haste, for they were to leave before the sun rose. Each household was filled with a sense of urgency, as the time for liberation had finally arrived. As dawn broke, the Israelites began their exodus, stepping out of the bondage that had held them captive for so long. Moses led the way, holding his staff high, while Aaron followed close behind. They traveled in a great multitude, men, women, and children, forming a long line that wound through the desert. God guided them by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, a visible reminder of his constant presence and protection. The journey was not without its challenges. The path led them away from the well-traveled roads of the Philistines, and instead, they found themselves traversing the more difficult terrain of the wilderness. As they moved farther from Egypt, a sense of wonder filled their hearts. They were free, yet uncertainty loomed in the distance. Questions lingered. Where would they go? What would they face in the wilderness? But through it all, their faith in God remained steadfast. However, word of their departure reached Pharaoh's ears, and once again, his heart hardened. Regret seeped into his mind as he realized the cost of his defiance. "What have we done?" he cried out to his advisors. "We have let the Israelites go, and now we are without their service." In a fury, he summoned his chariots and soldiers, determined to bring the Israelites back by force. The clatter of hooves and the rumble of chariots echoed ominously as they pursued the fleeing people. As the Israelites journeyed deeper into the wilderness, they soon found themselves at the edge of the Red Sea, the water stretching endlessly before them, a barrier to their escape. Suddenly, panic set in as they turned to see Pharaoh's army advancing toward them. Fear gripped their hearts, and the cries of the people rose in a chorus of despair. "Have you brought us out here to die?" they shouted at Moses. "Were there no graves in Egypt that you took us away to perish in the wilderness?" Moses, standing firm, felt the weight of their anguish pressing down upon him, yet he knew the truth of God's promise. "Fear not," he declared, his voice steady. "Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." With those words, Moses turned to God in prayer, seeking guidance in the midst of despair. God's response came swiftly. "Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground." Filled with renewed faith, Moses obeyed. He lifted his staff and the waters began to part, revealing a pathway through the sea. The wind roared around them as the waters rose like walls, creating a corridor of dry ground. The Israelites watched in awe as the miraculous scene unfolded. The air crackled with anticipation, and a sense of reverence filled the hearts of those who dared to take the first steps onto the seabed. The path was dry beneath their feet, a stunning testament to God's power and promise. With a mix of fear and exhilaration, the people stepped into the parted waters, their hearts racing as they walked forward, flanked by towering walls of water on either side. Children clutched their parents' hands tightly, and the elderly moved cautiously but determinedly. The wonder of it all enveloped them like a warm embrace, their journey now a miraculous adventure. As they crossed, the Egyptians charged after them, their chariots clattering in pursuit. But as they neared the center of the sea, God looked down upon them, confusion setting in among Pharaoh's forces. "Let us flee from before Israel," they cried out in terror. "For the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Yet it was too late. God commanded the waters to return, and as soon as the last of the Israelites stepped onto dry land, the waters cascaded back into place. The mighty waves crashed over Pharaoh and his army, consuming them in a swirling tide. The roar of the sea drowned out the cries of despair, and in an instant, the pursuit ceased. The Israelites turned to watch as the power of God swept away their oppressors, a moment forever etched in their hearts and minds. As the waters settled, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm golden glow over the scene. The Israelites stood on the shore of the Red Sea, their hearts filled with gratitude and awe. They had witnessed the salvation of the Lord and the destruction of their enemies, a powerful affirmation of their faith. Moses, seeing the joy and relief on the faces of the people, took up his tambourine and led them in a song of praise. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." The song echoed across the sands, a jubilant celebration of their newfound freedom. Women danced, men clapped, and children laughed, their voices rising to the heavens as they expressed their joy and gratitude. Through the power of faith and the mighty hand of God, the Israelites had journeyed from bondage to liberation. As they continued their trek through the wilderness, they carried with them the hope of a new beginning, the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey, and the knowledge that their God was with them every step of the way. Chapter 9. The Wilderness Journey, Trusting in God's Provision. As the echoes of their triumphant song faded into the distance, the Israelites began their journey through the wilderness, a vast and untamed expanse that stretched before them like a blank canvas. The path ahead was uncharted, filled with both uncertainty and promise. Each step they took was a reminder of their miraculous escape from Egypt, but the wilderness was also a place of challenges. Here they would face tests of faith, moments of doubt, and the opportunity to grow closer to God. The sun rose high in the sky, casting a warm light upon the weary travelers. As the day wore on, the landscape changed from sandy stretches to rugged hills and rocky outcrops. The Israelites walked together, their hearts still filled with joy, but soon the reality of their situation began to set in. They had left behind the comforts of Egypt, and the vastness of the wilderness reminded them of their vulnerability. Questions bubbled up among the people. Where would they find food and water? How would they survive in this barren land? After several days of travel, the provisions they had brought from Egypt began to dwindle. The joyous laughter that had once filled the air was replaced by whispers of concern and unease. "If only we had stayed in Egypt," some murmured. "At least there we had food to eat." The memories of their time in slavery began to blur into a false nostalgia, overshadowing the pain of their oppression. Fear crept in like a shadow, casting doubt upon the promises of God. Moses, sensing the unrest among the people, turned to God in prayer, seeking guidance. The Lord reassured him, saying, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not." With this divine promise, Moses conveyed the message to the Israelites. "Tomorrow, you will see the glory of the Lord. He will provide for us." The next morning, as the sun began to rise, the Israelites emerged from their tents with anticipation. As they looked out upon the landscape, they beheld a miraculous sight. The ground was covered with a fine, flake-like substance, glistening in the morning light. It looked like frost on the ground, and they called it manna, which means "what is it?" in Hebrew. They marveled at this heavenly gift, each person filling their containers with the sweet, nourishing substance. "Gather what you need for today," Moses instructed, "but do not keep any until morning." Obediently, they collected the manna, but some, driven by fear of scarcity, hoarded more than they needed. When morning came, they discovered that what they had kept had spoiled overnight, a clear reminder that God's provision was for each day alone. He taught them to trust in Him daily, to rely on His goodness and grace. As days turned into weeks, the Israelites grew accustomed to gathering manna each morning. It became their daily bread, nourishing their bodies and sustaining their journey. God also provided quail in the evenings, filling their hunger for meat. With each meal, they were reminded of his faithfulness, yet still, they faced challenges along the way. One day, as they traveled through the dry wilderness, they came to a place called Mara, only to find the waters there bitter and undrinkable. The people complained against Moses, their voices filled with frustration and despair. "What shall we drink?" they cried. Once again, Moses sought the Lord, and God instructed him to throw a piece of wood into the waters. When he obeyed, the waters became sweet and refreshing. This miracle was another reminder of God's power and provision, reinforcing their need to trust him in times of trouble. But the journey continued, and the wilderness held many more lessons. As they traveled on, they encountered a lack of water once again, and this time the people were desperate. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in this wilderness?" they cried. Their faith wavered under the weight of their thirst, and Moses felt the burden of their complaints. He cried out to God, and the Lord instructed him to gather the elders of Israel and take his staff to a rock at Horeb. Moses did as he was commanded, striking the rock with his staff. To the astonishment of all, water gushed forth from the stone, providing enough for the entire congregation and their flocks. It was a powerful testament to God's unfailing provision, showing that even in the harshest circumstances, he could bring forth life and sustenance. As they continued their journey, they faced the Amalekites who came out to fight against them. Fear threatened to overwhelm the Israelites once again, but Moses, under God's guidance, selected Joshua to lead the battle. As Moses stood on a nearby hill, his hands lifted high in prayer, the Israelites fought valiantly. Whenever his hands were raised, they gained the upper hand, but when they faltered, the enemy surged forward. Aaron and Hur, recognizing the struggle, supported Moses by holding his arms up until sunset, ensuring their victory. Through each trial, God was shaping the hearts of his people. He was teaching them to trust, to rely on him, and to support one another in faith. They were learning that the wilderness, though harsh, was a place of growth, where they could encounter God in powerful ways. As they journeyed onward, they realized that their physical needs were met, but more importantly, their spiritual understanding was deepening. The Israelites were beginning to recognize the importance of obedience, trust, and community. Their hearts, once bound by fear and doubt, were being transformed into hearts of faith, willing to follow the God who had delivered them. The wilderness journey was not merely a path to a promised land. It was a sacred time of learning, reflection, and preparation. Each step they took brought them closer to the heart of God, fostering a deepened trust that would carry them through the trials ahead. And with each morning's gathering of manna, they were reminded that God's provision was not just a necessity. It was a promise of his unwavering presence and love. Chapter 10, Mount Sinai and the Promise of a New Covenant. After many months of wandering through the wilderness, the Israelites arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai, a majestic peak that towered over the arid landscape. The mountain loomed large, shrouded in mystery and glory, its summit hidden by thick clouds. This was no ordinary place. It was the very mountain where God had chosen to reveal himself to his people. Here, they would encounter the holiness of God and receive his divine instructions for living in harmony with him and one another. As the Israelites set up their camp at the base of the mountain, excitement and apprehension filled the air. They were weary from their journey but filled with a sense of anticipation. God had led them through trials and tribulations, providing for their every need, and now they were about to enter into a sacred covenant with him. Moses ascended the mountain, leaving the people behind, and as he climbed, he was enveloped by a thick cloud, a visible manifestation of God's presence. On the mountain, the air crackled with energy as the voice of God thundered through the clouds. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage," he proclaimed. This was the preamble to the commandments that would guide the people in their new life. Moses listened intently, absorbing each word as God delivered the 10 Commandments, divine principles meant to foster a community built on love, respect, and righteousness. "Have no other gods before me," God declared, establishing the foundation of their relationship. He continued, detailing commandments that would govern their worship and interactions. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. With each command, God provided a glimpse into his character, revealing his desire for his people to reflect his holiness and justice in their lives. After receiving the commandments, Moses descended the mountain, his face aglow with the radiance of God's glory. The people were in awe of the sight, but they were also fearful. Do not be afraid, Moses reassured them, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The Israelites listened intently, their hearts eager to understand how to live in a way that honored their God. Moses then instructed them on how to build an altar and offer sacrifices, establishing a tangible way for the people to express their devotion to God. They were called to be a holy nation, a people set apart, and the covenant they entered into was not just a contract but a promise of relationship. God's commitment to be with them as they journeyed to the promised land. As the days passed at the foot of Mount Sinai, the Israelites continued to prepare their hearts for the new covenant. They were to be a people marked by obedience and love, learning to trust in God's guidance in all aspects of their lives. They engaged in communal worship, offering thanks and praise for the deliverance they had experienced. Each sacrifice was a reminder of God's grace and mercy, reinforcing their commitment to live according to his ways. But amid the glory of God's presence, there was also a sobering reminder of their human frailty. While Moses remained on the mountain, the people grew anxious. They felt abandoned, and their fear turned to doubt. In their longing for reassurance, they approached Aaron, demanding an idol to lead them. Make us gods that shall go before us, they insisted, forgetting the powerful deliverance they had witnessed just days before. Aaron, succumbing to their pressure, fashioned a golden calf, and the people rejoiced, believing they had created a tangible representation of the divine. As they celebrated, they lost sight of the holy covenant they had just entered into. When Moses descended and saw the chaos, his heart broke. He confronted the people, shattering the tablets of stone that held the commandments, a powerful symbol of their broken relationship with God. In that moment, Moses interceded on behalf of the people, pleading with God for their forgiveness. He reminded God of his promises, and with a heart full of compassion, God chose to renew the covenant. He instructed Moses to carve 2 new tablets, promising to write the commandments once again. This act of grace demonstrated God's unwavering commitment to his people, even when they faltered. Moses returned to the mountain, humbled and resolute. As he ascended once more, he sought a deeper understanding of God's character. Show me your glory, he implored, yearning for a more intimate experience of the Almighty. God responded, revealing his nature to Moses, proclaiming, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth. This encounter solidified Moses' understanding of God's faithfulness, even amid human failure. As Moses descended the mountain once more, he brought the new tablets with him, and with them came a renewed sense of purpose for the Israelites. They were called to be a light to the nations, living out the commandments as a testament to God's grace. The community began to understand that their journey was not just about reaching the promised land, but also about cultivating a deep and abiding relationship with the God who had chosen them. Over time, the Israelites learned to trust in God's provision and guidance, and the wilderness became a place of transformation. They grew from a group of former slaves into a community of faith, bound together by their commitment to God and to one another. Through trials and triumphs, they discovered the depth of his love and the beauty of living in obedience to his word. As they prepared to continue their journey, Moses reminded them of their calling, to remember the Lord their God, to love him with all their heart, soul, and strength, and to teach their children the ways of the Lord. The journey ahead was still fraught with challenges, but they would face it together, fortified by their covenant with God. And so, as the Israelites prepared to leave Mount Sinai, they carried with them the commandments and the promise of a new beginning. Their hearts were filled with hope, and their spirits renewed, as they stepped forward into the wilderness, ready to embrace the path that God had set before them. In that sacred moment, they understood that this journey was more than a physical trek. It was a journey of faith, a pilgrimage toward the fulfillment of God's promises. Together, they walked onward, knowing they were not alone, for God Himself was guiding them every step of the way. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through the story of Moses. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and consider subscribing to our channel to join our community and for more videos like this. Now I wish you a peaceful and blessed sleep, and I'll see you on the next video. May God bless you.